Good evening from New York. I'm Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Journeys. Welcome and thank you to those who are now joining us for the first time. Every week, I invite someone on CWS Journeys to share their story, simply because I believe we are never more connected than when we share our stories, and not just to talk about our successes, but sometimes to mention some of the challenges we might have had, how we got up when we fell. And in so doing, I'm hoping that someone, especially young people listening to a guest, can be inspired to step beyond their challenges and limitations. And the thing is that we can never know what a word, what sharing an experience can do for someone. We may not be around to see what that person becomes, but it doesn't mean that we should not share and we should not give. But tonight is special. I have as a guest uh, daughter. I call Guyanese women gems of our soil. Miss Felicia Persaud. Felicia, good evening and welcome to CWS Journeys.
A very good evening to you, Selwyn. A very good evening to all the listeners and viewers. And it's such a pleasure to be joining you this evening.
Thank you. Felicia, give us three qualities you think about yourself when someone asks you to describe yourself. What comes to mind?
I think I'm pretty smart, I'm very loyal, and I'm very kind. Those are three qualities that I cherish very much.
Take us into the life of Felicia at age 9 and 14.
At age 9, I was starting out at Queen's College. I had just passed the common entrance exam. For those from Guyana of that generation, they would know that. And coming into a high school that was the top of the country with kids who were 11 and up was very intimidating. But also a lesson in terms of standing up for myself, a lesson in terms of strength and courage, and really being able to fight back and realize that you're as independent and as tough as you want to be and as you set yourself out to be. And I think that really was it. At age 14, I was still in high school. So basically, it was a very challenging time for me, coming from such a tender age, trying to adapt and basically compete against kids who were so much more, I think, intellectually stronger than I was, as well as older, more exposed, more mature. It was a very, very testing time. And I think if I had to do it all over again, I'll tell my parents, don't listen to the teachers. Basically, just let me go through the ranks and do it like any normal kid would do.
What subject did you particularly enjoy in school?
I especially enjoyed literature. I was always a very avid reader. I didn't go much to kindergarten after the first year. First week, I was actually crying all the time. So my grandmother took pity on me, and she just said, "Okay, forget kindergarten. I'll homeschool you for a while." And so she really pushed me to read a lot. And with reading, it just widened my imagination. So once I got to high school, literature became something that I fell in love with, got very passionate about. Writing was something that I also was very passionate about. And really, I think it helped me on my journey, today, especially to this day.
You mentioned your grandmother. Would you consider her one of the strong women that have influenced you in your life?
Absolutely. I grew up with my grandmother from baby. My mom was a young, married woman, and she had just gotten into teachers training college. And when she gave birth to me, so she had very little time. And so I ended up essentially, as I like to say, being dumped on my granny. And my granny raised me along with my aunts and uncles. So I grew up in a very, very big household, very much loved, because I was the first and only grandchild. And yes, my grandmother has inspired and influenced me. And even though she's gone, I still find myself talking to her every day.
Was she very strict?
She was very. stern. She was very proper, and she expected that. You were taught to speak properly, taught to act properly. She was very British, I guess, in a way. Um, and that was just her upbringing and the way that she carried herself, and she expected all of us to do the same. So I think she spoiled me in a way because I was her granddaughter, but not in a very bad way. I don't think, she was not somebody who punished in terms of the corporal punishment that we know, but she only had to say your name. And if she called you by your full name, you knew that you were in trouble. So she was strong in that way because she was 40, just 40 when her husband died, and she already had 9 kids, and she did not have a job, and she raised those 9 kids, essentially being creative and being an entrepreneur and doing everything right that she had to do to bring everybody up and then to raise her grandkids. So I think she was just a phenomenal woman.
Would you, do you think that the entrepreneurial bug bit you back then?
I don't think so. I think looking back, yes, but at the time, you never know. You just know that this is your life. You didn't know that you were rich or poor. You just knew that you were existing, you were living. This was it. So I didn't really think of my grandmother as an entrepreneur then until now,
Mhm.
and looking back and realizing, wow, what an amazing woman she had to be to do all that she did and raise all these kids alone without any job. Can you imagine? How many women out there today are doing that, and so I think it really kudos to the ancestors for what they've done for us and where they've brought us. And I think we should always look back and pay tribute to that and give credit where credit is due.
So this very brilliant young lady, 9 years old, entering Queen's College, among, as you said, the more intellectually astute children having to compete, disciplined because of her grandmother, yet had this drive and this motivation to succeed and to compete. But tell us about the young girl that left high school. What has she become then?
I left high school at age 16 and went on to the University of Guyana, and I wanted to do, literature because that was my passion. But once I got there, I realized literature was just, a study of ancient British writings, which was just not something that was um, sellable, as they would say. So I ended up switching to communications, which was a challenge at the time because they were only accepting people who worked in the field, and I was 16 years old. So I had a challenge with the head of communications at the time, fighting with him, and then lobbying the dean, who essentially, agreed that I should, sign on because I was bold enough. But I think it taught me a sense of standing up for myself. I didn't have a big brother to come and fight my battles. So I learned very early to be strong, to stand up for myself. And I think I left high school just so much stronger and so much in control. And regardless of situations, I'm able to pretty much stand my ground and speak my mind and really take the bull by the horn, as they say.
I see that the lobbying aspect of you started early. We're going to talk about different lobbying later on in the conversation. But when if you were to eavesdrop your mother and your grandmother telling a stranger about you, how do you think they will describe you?
Well, I think it would be polar opposites. My mother, as a kid, she thought I was very rude, and she said I was an upstart and very stubborn. So I think that's how she would have described me. My grandmother, on the other hand, would have much more flattering things to say. So it depends on whom you would ask. But I always know that one thing they would agree on is that I was always very, very much independent, and I would always, speak my mind. And at the time, growing up in Guyana, kids are supposed to be seen, not heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mother had a problem with that. My grandmother absolutely never did. She always was a woman who spoke her mind, and I think she'd be very proud today if she could see me. And I think she could. You know, I do believe in the spirit. I believe in the ancestors are always with you. So I think she's very proud.
I want to ease up your timeline a little bit to your introduction or flirt, I guess, with digital publishing. What Well, you actually was a pioneer in the field of digital publishing in the Caribbean market. What what do you know and what do you know now and wish you knew then about digital publishing?
I really wish that I knew I knew all of the technical aspects that I know now.
Hmm.
You know, things like SEO, things like just website things that you depended on other people, like a quote unquote webmaster, to tell you or to understand. I mean, I have been through so many supposed web experts and website experts who claimed they knew what they were doing. And you know, you learn and you pay to learn in a real sense. And so I really wish that I had the knowledge that I do now and can actually tell people what I want and direct them. It was just a very rough start for us. And I was a journalist for many years, so that was my background. So writing stories was what I did best. That's what I knew. I did not know the technical aspects, and I think that that's something that really you also need, and especially now in the way that digital journalism is growing.
So you started off as print journalist, and
Yeah.
then you dove into the whole digital journalism. Was it a difficult transition for you? What was that like the early stages?
Well, it wasn't very difficult because you know in your mind now you're just writing for a different audience. So it's really the same standards of journalism that you hold yourself accountable to. The same five W's and the H, the same everything. But now you're coming up against people who are so-called publishers who believe that it's not just about journalism anymore. It's about tabloid journalism. It's about advertising. It's about native content marketing more than actual telling the story. And so that's something that you kind of run in against very early, and you're always wondering, where do you draw the line? So you have to be sort of now adaptable with everything that's happening. And at the time, I was just a very strict journalist and editor who felt this is the way it had to be done. And when we started out with a company as an employee at the time, we butted heads on what it is to be. It was, and so that's how we parted ways, and how Heartbeat News, now News Americas Now, was born.
So what was with tabloid journalism and all these different journalism faux pas? What frustrated you the most about it?
I think the frustration comes when you go up against people who are owners of these publications that have absolutely no clue what a news story is. So they want to now dictate to you what you should write and how you should write and tell you what news is. And I think that is the frustrating part. It was for me and for a lot of people who are in the journalism field who are now forced to transition from print into digital, and it's happening, all over. It is really the very tough transition that you have to face. I mean, when you look even at traditional newspapers like the Daily News, it's gone very tabloid. Everybody is going tabloid, but how do you sort of draw the balance? How do you still report on your community, on your niche, and still have the balance with the tabloid and the entertainment and the native content advertising? I think it's all about balance, just like life is about balance. And I think sometimes people tend to lose their way and and say it's one way or the other instead of just striking a balance at every step.
With the advent and growth in digital media over the years, the past several years, do you see a trend to invest more in digital media over traditional media?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the way that the business is going. When you look even at advertising agencies, traditional advertising agencies have now to play catch up with digital advertising agencies, and digital advertising agencies are now playing catch up with content advertising agencies. So everything is coming back to content. It's about content marketing. Companies themselves are investing millions of dollars every year in selling and telling their story. And that's really where the game of advertising and digital marketing and digital journalism is heading. It's really heading back to the main thing, which is how do we tell the story so that we can influence people to listen, to look, and to read. And that's what everybody's competing now for eyeballs. Everybody has to make it more creative, and that's what I think the whole digital journalism. So definitely, I mean, you look at many print publications; they've gone digital. They've abandoned the print because it doesn't make any sense anymore. It's too costly, and everybody's online. Everybody's reading free content, and that's the way it is now. How do you monetize it? That is the key.
That's the key.
That's the question that everybody's struggling with. How do you monetize the content? And I think that's where the whole native advertising is coming into play, and is going to keep growing at a very rapid pace in the next few years.
Are you surprised from when you started to now? Are you surprised by digital media's trajectory or speed?
Absolutely not. I mean, we predicted this. There was a time in the Caribbean community, even among Caribbean tourism organizations, for instance, and tourism countries, where they thought it was a joke, like this was a phase that, oh, you're online, you have an online publication, like it was a bad thing, in this very derogatory way. And look at it now. They're all online. They all have to build apps. They all have to do social media. There was a time when people laughed and said, "Oh, she's just an online publication," and there was another woman who was doing social media before social media was the in thing. And people laughed at her and said, "Oh, she just has like a social media thing." And now social media is the big thing. It's the biggest thing that everybody is on. So I think, we're playing catch up in the Caribbean community as usual. But it is here to stay. It's definitely staying, and it's not going anywhere. As long as the internet exists, I think we're going nowhere but up.
You've been in mass communication and marketing and all these things for a while, and there's a question that always haunts me: do our behavior influence social media, or social media influence our behavior, or is it a mix of both?
I would say personally, it's a mix. Speaking from the Caribbean experience, because I don't think we are so much taken by the quote unquote mainstream media and what they're doing. But some of our kids, especially second generation Caribbean Americans who are growing up here, they definitely are influenced by the American culture more than first generation. So it varies, I would think. It would vary depending on the demographic, but I think at the end of the day, what I see, a lot of people end up, liking stories. They like stories about people in the diaspora who are doing well. They end up liking stories about their food, about their culture, about inspirational things and people, and things that are happening back home. So I think it varies. It really does vary depending on the person and their culture and their socialization and what exactly their background is. It really does vary in terms of the impact.
You have your own news media outlet. What is the name of it?
It's News Americas. That's our news service.
Tell us a little bit about that.
News Americas now started out as Heartbeat News at the time, and then we switched over to Caribbean World News, and now it's News Americas now because we wanted to be more inclusive of the entire Americas. So we cover Caribbean, Latin America, and what's happening in the Americas here, North America. And we really do cover a lot of stories, features, entertainment, blogs, and we're looking basically expanding that with an upgrade that we're going to be releasing early next year to really expand it more and be more comprehensive in terms of the content that we're offering and adding new features that would keep people entertained. So we really are looking to tell and keep telling the Caribbean story and documenting our Caribbean experience and pointing to people here in our diaspora who are doing very well as Caribbean-born people or people of Caribbean heritage in this country, all across the country.
With your education and experience, Felicia, you could have gone into any media space. Why focus on the Caribbean? What is the Caribbean's appeal to you personally?
Well, actually, I started out, doing the Caribbean when I came here to this country. I was covering only Caribbean. Then I was covering general news. Then I was covering African American news. So I have worked all over in terms of the circle of media, African news. But it always came back to home. And I think when we started the digital collaboration, it was Caribbean in origin. And I think that brought me back to home and really had me focus on what exactly home is about. And home in America, in the United States, is really the Caribbean. That's the only real identity you have in a way, because people don't really understand if you say, "Oh, I'm from Guyana," or I'm from, or they have all kinds of perceptions. So when you say you're from the Caribbean, it becomes, oh, okay, they understand that a whole lot more. And I think that's where it started and basically grew from there, because at the time I saw the potential. It was a vacuum. It was a niche market that was wide open, and started out with the news, and then we launched Carib PR Wire, which is today the official wire service of the entire Caribbean. We're part of the PR Newswire, which is the global newswire service. And then 5 years ago, we saw the need for an investment forum focused on investments in the Caribbean and started Invest Caribbean now. So everything has come back to home. And I think it really is about promoting this region because it is too often dismissed, it's ignored. People think of it as too small. They think it's just for vacation only. And I think we have to tell the other side of the equation, the other side of the story, which is development of the Caribbean, the investment of the Caribbean, the people there who are doing so well. I think that is really our challenge that we have, and I've set myself in terms of doing and growing and developing the region, whether it's the region itself or here in the diaspora.
I'm glad you mentioned Invest Caribbean. Tell us a little bit about that. But why, the big question, why invest in the Caribbean? What are you telling potential investors about the Caribbean that might interest them?
Well, I tell investors, first of all, the Caribbean is muy caliente, just like Latin America. That's my elevator pitch there. We're centrally located. We have no political issues in terms of upheavals. Most of the economies are democratic. Most of the economies are stable. Everybody is there in the Caribbean. We already have a huge tourism sector. We have an intellectual capital there in terms of human capital. So the Caribbean is ripe for investment, and not just tourism investment, but investment that is beyond tourism. And that is the story that we keep telling to investors. That is the story that we encourage countries to tell to investors as well, and to really promote sectors that are not just tourism. It's not just sun, sea, and sand, but it's also about investments. It's also about capital. It's also about the other industries that come out of tourism. And I think that is a story that we continue to tell. We just wrapped up a very amazing fifth year conference in St. Martin, in French St. Martin, and they were excited. They're still excited from it. We had 42 Chinese companies there as part of this year's event. and St. Martin is looking to build their port project there. They're going to be building a huge marina, so we're very excited to also be a part of that and to encourage and promote that sort of investment. And we really look forward to working and collaborating with other countries to do the same for their country.
How did this whole Invest Caribbean got started?
Basically, it's very interesting. The Caribbean Tourism Organization, we were collaborating with them in terms of promoting diaspora awareness and pushing tourism in the diaspora. And they've been having Caribbean Week in New York for maybe over 2 decades. All they did was come to New York and talk about sun, sea, and sand tourism. Here we were in the capital of the financial capital of the world, right there on Wall Street. There was never an investment component of the CTO Caribbean Week. And 5 years ago, I raised it as an idea with them, and they thought it was a great idea. And next thing I know, I'm being told, well, since you brought the idea, why don't you do it? And so really, that is the truth on how Invest Caribbean came along. It's been a lot of work since. We started out just as a breakfast forum. Now we've gone into a 2-day conference outside of the country. So it really is, it's all about the Caribbean and telling the other side of the Caribbean, not just telling people, oh, we're a great destination, come vacation with us, but also come and invest your money and grow our economies and help the next generation to grow as well.
How does an investor or a potential investor get involved?
Well, we'd love for them to contact us. We encourage that all the time. InvestCaribbeanNow.com. That's our website. They can contact us through there, and we can start the dialogue. So it depends on what they're looking to do. We're happy to collaborate with them. We work with governments. We consider ourselves the matchmaker, where we take the investor in. We introduce them to the government, have the government sell their projects or product, and basically make it happen, close the deal. And that's what we do. We're also looking to help young and upcoming businesses, especially small businesses and medium enterprises, starting with those here in the U.S. and Canada, helping them to access capital. We're starting a project soon where we will be able to offer them loans so that they can have access to loans to grow their business, access to advance in cash in terms of invoices, what they call cash advances now, to help them also in terms of making payroll. And, sometimes people are always slow in paying, especially small and tiny businesses. They're always struggling. How do they get their invoices paid? Well, we're going to be able to help them with that as well. So Invest Caribbean now is really not just looking at the huge projects in countries and working with governments, but we're also looking to grow from the ground up. And we believe that happens when you help small entrepreneurs and small businesses to grow and develop into huge enterprises. And that is the challenge that I've set myself. It is a huge challenge, but we hope with God's grace that it can happen and we can make it happen for our community, because we're so behind when you look at where other communities are. And I'm really determined to keep this Selwyn, to keep it growing, and to make sure that we are at the forefront of where we should be as a people.
For the young people, especially young women, young ladies who are listening to you and being inspired, you have a penchant for thinking big and going after these things. What advice do you give to a young person who is perhaps intimidated by thinking big, or
Well, I would say what I've learned, the lesson is the biggest obstacle that we have is fear. If you have fear can really hold you back. And fear can intimidate, and fear can make sure that you get nowhere. You can't have fear. And in order to not have fear, you have to have faith. So you have to tap into faith. You have to be able to access the spirituality that is in all of us. And I think with that, all things are possible. The good book tells us that. So I think for me, that's been my journey in terms of a personal one, is being able to grow my spirituality and grow into believing that all things are possible, and knowing that you're not alone, that you always have the man upstairs with you. He's walking with you, he's guiding you, he's opening doors. And that is something that you have to tap into and really believe it and keep pushing forward. Of course, you have to do the work. You can't just depend on God. Like I always tell people, manna does not fall from heaven. Don't believe the hype. That was one time, eons ago. But today, manna doesn't fall from heaven. It says, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread, right?
Yes.
So that is really, you have to put in the work. You have to develop, most of all, partnerships and relationships and linkages, because without them, you cannot grow, because no man is an island. You can't just achieve all these things. You have to establish collaborations and make sure that the people that you are collaborating with are also on the same upward trajectory in terms of growth, and they have the same big picture. Because oftentimes what happens, especially when we expose ourselves only to people in our community or in our little circle, they get negative. You raise an idea and they would say, oh, that's not going to happen. Who do you think you are? That's impossible. So don't listen to that. Don't listen to the enemy's lies. Just believe. If you have a vision in your heart, if you have an idea, God has put it there and he's going to make a way, and you have to believe that and really keep pushing forward. Keep educating yourself, most of all, and understanding the business that you're in, and keep growing and making sure that you have the knowledge to do this, because without it, you're not going to get anywhere as well.